There's a person who's afraid of heights, or who thinks wearing a specific costume is ridiculous, or who believes that they have no skills at babysitting. But they have an acquaintance who's trying to convince them to do that very thing. The first person says, "No, never, I'm not going to do it, there's no way." And then, smash cut to them strapped in a parachuting harness, or dancing in the costume, or covered in baby powder while changing a diaper. The quick juxtaposition of situations heightens the post-cut experience, because we see how adamant the person was about their position on the subject. "There's no way" suddenly becomes, "Oh, let me show you how there is a way." In this sermon from 1 Samuel chapter 5 verse 1 to chapter 7 verse 2, we get the post-cut sequence after the last sermon's "There's no way." If you recall, the Philistines, the enemies who personify the book's theme of God's restoring work continues on regardless of the problems of this life and the human evil that brings it about. They had taken captive the Ark of the Covenant, and killed the sons of Eli just as God foretold his judgment against them would come on that same day. As well, Eli died, and as his daughter-in-law heard news of her husband's and father-in-law's deaths, plus news of the taking of the Ark of the Covenant, she went into labor. Just before she died as well, she named the child Ichabod, which means "there is no glory." And it's stated twice why she did it. Because glory had departed Israel, or so she believed. She adamantly stated, "There's no glory." But God does a smash cut as we reach the transition from chapter 4 to chapter 5. As the Ark of the Covenant takes center stage, as if it were the Ark's day out. And God says, "Oh, you think that this supposed defeat means that I have lost my power? You think that there's no glory? Well, I'm going to show you glory. My glory that works despite the failures of my people. Despite the machinations of humanity who think that they're greater than I am. I will show you there is glory." The Hebrew word for glory repeats again and again in these 2+ chapters, like a refrain echoing God's snicker at humanity's assumption at a loss of his glory. He is glorious despite seeming defeat. And because of that, we all, enemy and family, should give him the proper value and weight. Woe to us if we don't. We will all bow before the Creator of everything, willingly or not. 1 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 to 5. When the Philistines captured the Ark of God, they brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then the Philistines took the Ark of God and brought it into the house of Dagon, and set it up beside Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod rose early the next day, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the Ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and put him back in his place. But when they rose early the next morning, behold, Dagon had fallen face downward on the ground before the Ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both his hands were laying, cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk of Dagon was left to him. This is why the priests of Dagon and all who enter the house of Dagon do not tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. Excited by their seeming victory, the Philistines brought the Ark of the Covenant to their God's temple. They pictured it as if the God of Israel were now subjected to the lowly position of serving their god, Dagon, similar to how conquered kings were made to serve the king who conquered them, and stand as trophy and reminder to others of what happens when you defy the conqueror. To the Philistines, this was an embarrassingly humiliating moment for the God of Israel. They believed there was no glory left in him, that it left as he was now forced to serve their greater God. But laugh as the Philistines would at this moment, it would be God who had the last laugh as he shows them his glory. The next day, when the Philistines entered the temple, they found the image of Dagon face down, prostrate before the ark. It was like Dagon bowed before the God of Israel, Yahweh's glory far greater than the supposed God of the Philistines. And with even more humorous of a moment, the priests of Dagon put their God back in his proper place. Their God was so powerless that it had to be his followers who raised him up to his supposed glory. Unlike Yahweh, unlike the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the true God raises himself in his glory. This whole passage shows us that God does not need us to perform his will. His work continues with or without us. His glory is inherent, unlike so many notions of gods whose power relies on the amount of their worshippers and the level of devotion that they have. It's not like God would cease to exist if the number of his followers could be counted on a single hand. He doesn't need us to do his work. He does choose to work through his creation and wants to have a relationship with us, yes. But that is totally from his volition, from his will, not a necessity. This is the power of the God we followers of Jesus serve. And he is not at all like the measly little idols of other religions. He doesn't need his followers to raise him to his place like Dagon did. He doesn't need someone to rescue him. He'll do it himself. He'll throw his own weight around to show the power of his glory. Verse 4 tells us that the priests rose early the next day only to find that Dagon had fallen prostrate before the ark again. Only this time the statue's head and hands were no longer connected to the rest of its body. Some believe that this disfigurement of the statue shows that it fell with such force that the head and hands broke off. But the Hebrew doesn't say that they were broken off. Rather, they were cut off, like the ESV properly translates it. In warfare of that day, a head was cut off of the fallen enemies to prove their death, and hands were cut off to count casualties. In one single image, God showed the priests of Dagon that the God of Israel was the victor, not the defeated. And the defeat of their false god was so sure that it was the first thing they saw on their way to the daily worship, because it was placed right there on the threshold, first thing you see when you go to the altar. This proven defeat of their god even affected their worship of him decades later. God had the last laugh, because while the Philistines had brought in what they thought was a servant for their god, it was actually the glorious God of all things, the one who is served by all. All will bow before him, willingly or not, right now or one day in the future. All will bow. But the people of the Philistine city of Ashdod did exactly what every person who does not worship God does when faced with the truth of his power. Try to get as far away from him as they can. 1 Samuel chapter 5 verse 6 to chapter 6 verse 1. The hand of the Lord was heavy against the people of Ashdod, and he terrified and afflicted them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. And when the men of Ashdod saw how things were, they said, "The ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is hard against us and against Dagon our God." So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" And they answered, "Let the ark of the God of Israel be brought around to Gath." So they brought the ark of the God of Israel there. But after they had brought it around, the hand of the Lord was against the city, causing a very great panic. And he afflicted the men of the city, both young and old, so the tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. But as soon as the ark of God came to Ekron, the people of Ekron cried out, "They have brought around to us the ark of the God of Israel to kill us and our people." They sent therefore and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it return to its own place, that it may not kill us and our people." For there was a deathly panic throughout the whole city, and the hand of God was very heavy there. The men who did not die were struck with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to the heavens. The ark of the Lord was in the country of the Philistines 7 months. The defeat of Dagon and the destruction of his statue were the least of the worries of the people of Ashdod. God continued to show his glory through the destruction of their people. When verse 6 says that the hand of God was heavy against them, that word for heavy is the same Hebrew word for glory. This is because the idea behind glory is showing another their proper value, the weight of their presence. Instead of thinking lightly about them, one should think heavily about them. Quite literally, the author shows God throwing his weight around within the Philistine city, showing them his glory. The verse continues saying that he terrified and afflicted them, but I prefer the NAS translation of he ravaged and smote them. It carries the direness of the situation better, I think. And what did he ravage and smite them with? Some sort of physical plague? Something that creates hill-like protrusions on the body? From what we can tell with the language used, at least. Some would say boils, others say hemorrhoids, and still others look at the connection with rats in later parts of the chapter and speak of something like the bubonic plague. It's not really clear exactly what kind of physical plague is added to these people. But what is clear is that God showed them the weight of his glory. And something needed to happen, or else the people of Ashdod would be destroyed by that very same glory. So they called the lords of the 5 cities of the Philistines to decide what to do. The solution? Send the Ark of the Covenant to another of the cities. And so it went to Gath. Only the glory of God continued to wage war against those who stood as his enemies. The city of Gath was afflicted in a similar manner. And they eventually figured the same thing that the people of Ashdod had. The Ark of God had to go somewhere else. Only they didn't call a council to decide where it should go. They sent it on to Ekron, another of the Philistine cities. But when the Philistines of Ekron saw the ark coming, they were like, no, not here. Our countrymen have decided to kill us because that thing only brings death with it. They called another council of the Philistine lords, and the council decided that it would be best to send the ark back to its people. They surrendered, They surrendered to the Lord as he had waged war against them. This war needed to end. They raised the white flag. Send it back. They surrendered because the hand of God was very heavy against them. The glory of God had intensified, revealed to them that the weight of his power was greater than they could ever have imagined. For 7 months, the ark had bounced from Philistine city to Philistine city and brought nothing but God's own glory. His work done in the world without a single finger of help from his worshippers. But 2 questions struck the Philistines. 1, what should we do to appease this God so that his glory will be far removed from us? And 2, was this plague actually from the God of Israel, or just a coincidence? They ask these questions and get their answers in 1 Samuel chapter 6, verses 2 to 12. And the Philistines called for the priests and the diviners and said, what shall we do with the ark of the Lord? Tell us with what we shall send it to its place. And they said, if you send away the ark of the God of Israel, do not send it empty, but by all means return him a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be known to you why his hand does not turn away from you. And they said, what is the guilt offering that we should return to him? They answered, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For the same plague was on all of you and on all your lords. So you must make images of your tumors and images of your mice that ravage the land, and give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand from off you, and your gods, and your land. Why should you harden your hearts, as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? After he had dealt severely with them, did they not send the people away, and they departed? Now then, take and prepare a new cart and 2 milk cows, on which there has never come a yoke, and yoke the cows to the cart, but take their calves home, away from them. And take the ark of the Lord and place it on the cart, and put in a box at its side the figures of gold, which you are returning to him as a guilt offering. Then send it off, and let it go its way, and watch. If it goes up the way to its own land, to Beth-Shemesh, then it is he who has done this great harm. But if not, then we shall know that it is not his hand that struck us. It happened to us by coincidence. The men did so, and took 2 milk cows and yoked them to the cart, and shut up their calves at home. And they put the ark of the Lord on the cart, and the box with the golden mice and images of their tumors. And the cows went straight in the direction of Beth-Shemesh along one highway, lowing as they went. They turned neither to the right nor to the left, and the lords of the Philistines went after them as far as the border of Beth-Shemesh. The Philistines asked their priests and omen readers what to do. What was the proper procedure to rid themselves of this glorious destruction? The priest told them to send the ark back with golden symbols of the tumorous growths that had afflicted them, along with golden images of mice/rats that were ravaging the countryside, 1 for each of the 5 cities. This whole procedure sounds like they were trying to do something like sympathetic magic. If they sent images of their troubles away, then the troubles themselves would go away too. The images of the growths make sense, because they'd been afflicted with them. But what do mice/rats have to do with this whole thing? Well, if it was a bubonic plague type thing, they do make some sense. But also, Dagon was a fertility deity, and mice are often connected to the loss of crops, because they like to eat too. So this would show some interaction with Dagon's godly portfolio, a direct affront to his supposed area of influence, likely another part of the plague that they understood deeply. And notice in chapter 6, verse 6, the priests told them not to harden their hearts, like Pharaoh did when Yahweh sent plagues upon Egypt. They'd learned a little something when the Egyptians beat their ancestors, it seems. But it's also important for me to point out here that the word translated as harden is the same word for glory and weight that we've been looking at for this whole passage. The Philistines were told by their priests not to weigh their own hearts, not falsely claim the glory of their own hearts like Pharaoh did. And yes, it is also the same word for harden used in Exodus. Again, we see that glory belongs to God, and God alone. So, the plan was to send back the ark, with images of the things they wanted to get rid of. That made some sense to them. But what if this whole thing was just a coincidence of timing? What if it had nothing to do with the ark at all? After all, they did understand enough to know that some things are just part of the natural process. And they didn't want to be humbled before the God of Israel if they didn't need to be. This is where the priest's suggestion of how to go about returning the ark comes in. Basically, they made it impossible for natural circumstances to allow the ark to return. Thus, if it did, then things had to be guided by the hand of the God of Israel. This is why they strapped 2 cows to the cart who had never pulled one before. If they did the job that they'd never been trained to do, then it had to be God. But not only that, they took cows who had recently given birth, who would have full udders and want to milk their calves. Only the baby cows would be locked up in their barn. A natural cow would hear the cries of their calf and become single-minded in wanting to alleviate that outcry. So again, if these milk-full cows acted outside of their natural processes of cows, then it had to be God. But not only that, there would also be no driver for the cart, plenty of grass on either side of the road, lots of distractions for the cows. Surely, if these cows made it the whole 9 miles from Ekron to Bethshemesh without getting lost along the way, then it had to be the God of Israel circumventing their natures. Thus they would prove that this plague was due to the glory of Yahweh. And verse 12 tells us that the lords of the Philistines witnessed the glory of God at work. They followed behind as those cows went straight along the road to Bethshemesh, never once acting in line with the nature of cows. There was no doubt. God is glorious. But with that glory should also always come the proper worship of Him, something which the people of Bethshemesh learned right along with the Philistines. 1 Samuel chapter 6, verse 13 to chapter 7, verse 2. Now the people of Bethshemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley, and when they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark, they rejoiced to see it. The ark came into the field of Joshua of Bethshemesh and stopped there. A great stone was there, and they split up the wood of the cart and offered the cows as a burnt offering to the Lord. And the Levites took down the ark of the Lord, and the box that was beside it, in which were the golden figures, and set them upon the great stone. And the men of Bethshemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrificed sacrifices on that day to the Lord. And when the 5 lords of the Philistines saw it, they returned that day to Ekron. These are the golden tumors that the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to the Lord. 1 for Ashdod, 1 for Gaza, 1 for Ashkelon, 1 for Gath, 1 for Ekron. And the golden mice according to the number of all their cities of the Philistines, belonging to the 5 lords, both fortified cities and unwalled villages. The great stone beside which they set down the ark of the Lord is a witness to this day in the field of Joshua of Bethshemesh. And he struck some of the men of Bethshemesh because they looked upon the ark of the Lord. He struck 70 men of them. And the people mourned because the Lord had struck the people with a great blow. Then the men of Bethshemesh said, Who is able to stand before the Lord, this holy God? And to whom shall he go up away from us? So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath-Jearim, saying, The Philistines have returned the ark of the Lord. Come down and take it up to you. And the men of Kiriath-Jearim came and took up the ark of the Lord, and brought it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. And they consecrated his son Eleazar to have charge of the ark of the Lord. From the day that the ark was lodged at Kiriath-Jearim, a long time passed, some 20 years, and all the house of Israel lamented after the Lord. The strange procession of Philistines walking behind a driverless cart surprised the people of Bethshemesh. There, coming straight to the city, were the leaders of the Philistine cities and their entourages. But this was not an army on the march. No, this was something different. And that cart carried the Ark of the Covenant. This was a day of joy, a day to rejoice at the work of God. While the Philistines stopped at the edge of the city, the cows wheeled the cart to a field with a huge flat stone area. And the land belonged to a man named Joshua. Not the Joshua who led the people during the conquest of Canaan, but that leap to thinking of that military leader would not be far to go. Plus, when we add that the name means Yahweh saves, we could surmise that God led the cows to that field for a reason, to remind his people that the glorious one saves. It does not require his people to save him from his enemies. He's the one who saves, not them, not us. The Levites performed their job admirably. Being the only people who were supposed to touch the ark's lifting poles, they placed it on the stony area, while the people readied the sacrifice for their glorious God. They cut up the cart and used the same cows that bore it as the sacrifices, burned the whole thing. While the smoke of the sacrifices rose to the heavens, the people checked the box sent along with the ark. They saw the golden images, and likely asked the Philistines the meaning of the presents, at which the Philistines probably told the tale, because how else would the people of Bethshemesh know about what happened during that 7-month period of time? And verse 17 specifically lists out each of the cities of the Philistines, like a list of conquered cities during ancient warfare. These are the people to whom God had shown his glory as he defeated them himself. And the Philistines left, but that was not the end of God's lesson of his glory. That lesson is pretty clear, even if there is an oddity among the verses describing the lesson. So I'll quickly describe this strangeness, and then point out the lesson that remains the same regardless of the interpretation. Verse 19 has what is probably the most explicit textual variant that I have ever seen in the Old Testament. You'll notice that in the ESV, it said that 70 people died from looking at the ark, something which only specific Levites were supposed to be able to do. And the reason why we have the Indiana Jones face-melting scene. Although those filmmakers mistook it for looking into the ark instead of just looking at the ark like it should have been. Anyway, so it says 70 people died. However, people following in other translations might have seen that it read 50,000 people died. A number that's kind of strange given the fact that Beth-Shemesh was not a bustling metropolis. And still other translations say 50,070 people. Odd, because most would just round that thing to 50,000 themselves. Well, in the Hebrew it reads 70 men, 50,000 men. That's kind of an odd construction of numbering, even for Hebrew. So, which is it? Well, the whole thing can be even more obscured if you read the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, because it adds a sentence clause that mentions the sons of a man named Jeconiah, and how these sons of Jeconiah were not pleased with the other people of Beth-Shemesh for how they interacted with the ark. It was like they sneered at the rejoicing, and thus it was these sons of Jeconiah who were the 70 people who died. And it was because of their displeasure at the joyous reactions of the glory of God, not because these people looked at the ark. So which is it? 70 men, 50,000 men, 50,070 men, or 70 sons of Jeconiah who sneered at the people of God? I don't know which one it is. Honestly, probably the best answer a scholar can give. But what I do know is that the point is the same regardless of that answer. God must still be worshipped properly because of his glory. It doesn't matter whether it's the enemies of God or his followers who interact with him. Because he is glorious, we must all interact properly with him, or else judgment will fall upon us. We must give weight to the power of our Creator because he is worthy. Show him his value, show him his weight, show him his glory. God has a plan, a methodology that he has prescribed. And if we are to properly worship him, then we must join him, not just do things the way that we want, or scoff at his work because it's not what we imagined it would be. We join him because he is glorious. And when the weight of God's glory hit the people of Beth-Shemesh, when they witnessed the full force of God's glory, fear fell upon them too. And they sent off the ark to people more qualified to handle this interaction with God's glory. The people of Kiriath-Jearim took the ark to Eliezer, and for 20 years it remained there, while God continued to perform his work. God is glorious despite seeming defeat. He's able to continue his work even when everything seems lost, even when we feel like the culture around us is moving further and further away from him, even when it seems like people who claim to be his act more in line with that same culture than with his word. God is glorious, and his work will continue. For we who rejoice at the merest glimpse of his glory, let us continue to join him in his great work. Live the truth of God, keep his commands, and continue on speaking our hope to the world. Jesus is King, and the only way for his humble people to be restored. This is his glory. Don't lose hope, even if our circumstances in this world look like defeat, even if we're beaten and killed, even if the number of true followers of God in our culture dwindle to the amount of fingers on a single hand. Yahweh remains glorious, and he will bring salvation to his people. He is glorious enough to make all bow before him, and it is better for us to do so willingly. For those who sneer at the rejoicing of those who see the glory of God, for the people who have surrendered to the godlessness of our culture, don't harden your hearts to his glory. Don't let the weight of your own importance or the weight of our culture's claimed importance lead you to destruction and judgment. Place the weight upon the correct recipient. Think heavily of God and show him the glory that he deserves. We may think that there is no glory, may have the opinion that defeat means that God has lost, but he has proven time and again that seeming defeat merely means that he is at work and ready to throw his weight around for his amazing plan of restoration of his humble people. Don't count God out just because we think it's all a loss. God is glorious. Worship his glory.